you.
Thank you.
Thank you for all of you that are joining now. We're going to give it a few more minutes while our attendees populate, and then we'll kick off. All right, Will, we'll let you get started and we'll just kind of let this keep moving up, and so take it away.
All right. Thanks everybody for joining us. We appreciate it. I wanted to thank everybody, first of all, on behalf of REIC. These are interesting times, to say the least, that we're all living in, and the fact that we have over 100 people attending this virtual meeting, I think is a testament to REIC's membership and the information we provide. So thank you all for being here for that. I wanted to let everybody know on September 3rd, we have a joint event with ULI, which will be a breakfast, and it'll be a breakfast on race and real estate, which is a really interesting intersection of two significant issues in our world. So that'll be fascinating to attend. So make sure you join if you can. So the interesting part of this this panel is that it was originally set for April, and it was set to be in person, and we were doing this as a result of discussions that we had back in February. I think it's fascinating to think about where the world was then versus where we are now in mid-August. And specifically with condos in the Tampa marketplace, asking the question, are we all that different? That's sort of a theme that we're very interested to hear from our panelists today about. So I'd like to quickly introduce our panel. I'm not exactly sure how y'all are seeing them, so we're going to go left to right on my screen. Brian Taub is the president of Taub Ventures. He and his wife Debbie have been developers in this community for several decades, developed excellent product, including Bliss and St. Pete, and they're working on the sanctuary on Bayshore right now. Dave Moyer, who's the director of sales at Smith & Associates. So he works with all of the Smith developer services clients, and he's the head of that division on the sales side. So I have some interesting information there. Then we have Brian Van Slyke, who's the regional president of Coulter Urban. He's responsible for One, Saltaire, Hyde Park House, and then Coulter's projects down in Sarasota. So I want to thank all the panelists for your time today. So like I mentioned, one of the themes that I think we're going to explore today is what the difference between the pre-COVID world for Tampa condominium construction and the current environment, which is COVID. We're not quite post-COVID yet. I hope we are soon, but not yet. So I wanted to have put up our first poll for the audience, just to get a flavor of where the audience is on this issue. So you should see it on your screen. It's true or false. COVID has had a negative impact on Tampa condominium sales. And if you could just register your vote. We'll leave that open for a couple 30 seconds. All right. So Sherry and Brooke, if you want to, you can take that down and we can post the results in a minute after we get into the panel questions. All right. So Dave, I'd like to ask you just to give a sort of a survey look at the overall sales strength in the Tampa marketplace. If you could talk a little bit about where you guys were in the turn of the year as we came into 2020, and then where you are today, that'll give a nice flavor for our audience about what's going on.
Sure. Well, first off, new construction condominiums are pretty well suited for virtual presentations and virtual tours. A lot of the technology is in renderings and 3Ds in comparison to buying a single family home where you have to look at it. So in comparison to the other real estate assets, the new construction condominiums, we're pretty set up to handle that load of providing information. As far as sales, we in the market have come off probably a good 10-year run of productive real estate, and the condo market continued to heat up leading into 2020, and that hasn't slowed down. Although I remember it pretty candidly, and so does everybody else, right around St. Patrick's Day, we had to shift into a maybe closure of sales galleries and inviting people into the sales gallery and have maybe a 30-day pause as far as getting the actual sales, but it didn't stop the interest. I think you found more people who are at home now looking online, so it increased the digital look and feel. People maybe delayed their commitment to move forward with a contract, but overall, the general interest continues to be strong. The sales that didn't occur potentially in that March, April timeline enhanced in the June and July. And I think more of that was maybe in relationship to the economy as the stock markets and things continued to improve. I think the confidence did as well. And as you know, in Florida, the news was very different in New York City as it is in Florida, and still continues to be so. So we found that people who are snowbirds stayed here in Florida longer, and people who are here locally didn't travel as much as they used to. So they all thought about the way they live in their homes and have made decisions differently. Certainly, I would say we had quite a pause, maybe a 60-day pause. But other than that, believe candidly that our sales are back on projections overall in the entire market. And not necessarily anything with condos. Again, our condos have outdoor spaces, they have balconies. They're really more available to what, which is different in those New York City markets. Our developments are in different stages. So anything that it has a certain timeline and schedule, meaning that there's under construction or construction is evident, remains on construction schedule, and buyers are more readily to make those decisions. I think the folks of our developments that were trying to start a sales campaign maybe took the brakes on it or were a little bit caught behind. But the traffic of buyers coming into our sales gallery is completely reduced, less people coming in, but the quality of them is substantial. These, if you were expecting 15 people into a sales gallery, if it's 5, those 5 are legit strong buyers trying to make a decision. So overall, I think positive in that feedback.
Great. Thank you. Brian Van Slyke, question for you. So Dave talked about a 60-day pause. So COVID hits, everybody, wet blanket, everybody's trying to figure out which way is up and which way is down. In that period of time, you guys pushed forward, took down some land, you closed on some financing. Can you talk a little bit about your decision-making process as a company during that initial period of time where nobody knew what was going on that led you to remain confident enough to proceed with your projects in that period of time?
Sure. Well, obviously we take a longer term view. Coulter Urban, our primary focus is urban condos. So even though COVID had an impact. Obviously, our sales gallery shut down for 60 plus days. We were taking the longer term view. We were committed to our projects. We own the underlying land. We had good momentum. We had just launched conversion from reservation to contract on both of our Tampa Bay projects. So the timing was not ideal, but we had good traction from that initial conversion that gave us confidence and proof of concept. Obviously, with our success at one, we believe Tampa Bay is a strong condo market. We had the loan commitments in place. So it was just an overall confidence that, yes, this would have an impact. It would have a more of a near-term impact, but we believe long-term the fundamentals of condos in Tampa Bay are strong, and it's still a highly sought after asset class, and we remain committed to it. So it was more of a long-term play, realizing it would have some impact on our pro formas, on our deposit structures and our cash flows, but we reanalyzed that very quickly, and we're comfortable with the long-term outcome and decided to proceed forward. And we were unsure what the construction lending markets would look like post-COVID or as we recover from this. And we had the loan commitments in place, so we wanted to execute on those while there was a certainty there, and we could put that in place, secure the financing, even though we won't draw on it for a year plus on both projects, and just know that hurdle's behind us, and continue forward with construction.
Yeah, great. Brian Taub, you had the luxury, or perhaps the bad luck, to be under construction, plowing ahead, trying to hit delivery dates when COVID hit. And I know you and I had plenty of conversations about, are we going to have on-site inspections? Are they going to be virtual? Can you talk a little bit for our audience about some of the differences in actually being under construction, trying to complete a building during a pandemic versus some of the previous projects you had built?
Sure. First of all, thanks for having us. And this was an interesting scenario because, thank goodness, we were considered an essential industry for construction. And so we were permitted to go forward with our construction activities. The city, however, instituted COVID regulations that we had to adhere by. And what they did is employed a COVID nurse to visit all the major projects, ours included, and make sure that we adhered to the new COVID regulations, washing hands, social distancing, and wearing masks, etc. Obviously, social distancing is a bit tough when you're constructing a building, but we've done a great job. The contractor, Plaza, has done a great job. And by and large, we have not really missed a beat. The inspectors were somewhat reluctant to come out. They come out, they make sure that they are separated from the workers. For example, when our buck hoist was in process, they went up by themselves with the superintendent to visit the project, but we really did not have too much of a downfall with the COVID situation. Certain people, however, something that I never thought about, the production fell off just slightly, but not substantially. And that a lot of that was due not necessarily to COVID themselves having contracted it, but for example, schools being shut down. And so they have two parents having to be at home overseeing their children and making sure that somebody was there. So it took on a different twist.
Yeah. Brian Taub, sticking with you for a second. So you're expected to deliver your building Q4 of 2020. What kind of things are you thinking about in terms of how the closeout process will go that may be different during COVID versus previous sellouts?
Well, first of all, we are perhaps a bit out of the box because we have allowed visitation by purchasers' own consultants and their own contractors post-closing just to do measurements and verifications, and somewhat to the purchasers themselves to do pre-drywall walkthroughs. And we've done that with obviously being very careful, again, social distancing, masks, taking temperatures. What we imagine it's going to look like with regards to closings is we're looking to close starting in November, that we are going to do a punch out walkthrough as though it would occur in a normal situation, a few days before closing. And we will obviously do our first punch out ourselves, and then the buyer will walk in. But the buyer will walk in a more isolated situation where it will just be the buyer, owner's representative, and the contractor. So it will not be a lot of people surrounding the buyer.
Yeah. Dave and Brian Van Slyke, I want to revisit something that Brian mentioned about deposit structures. So in the pre-construction world, sort of pre-COVID, for those of our audience members who aren't familiar with this, buyers are typically putting down, north of 20% as a hard deposit on the purchase of the unit. Can you talk a little bit about how that's changing, if it's not changing, if your buyer pool is so deep that you can still get the 20, 30% deposits? Whoever wants to go first, but I'd love to hear from both of you on that.
Sure. Obviously, there's always a hurdle pre-construction, right? There's only a certain amount of buyers that have the comfort level to be early adopters in a condo project. It takes credibility from the developer, and obviously Coulter and Brian Taub have that credibility. Unfortunately, there are others that don't necessarily always perform. So that kind of casts a negative shadow on condo developers in general. But beyond that normal hesitancy to take that long-term ride and put that money at risk, when the stock market had collapsed and there was a lot more uncertainty, sure, there was a hesitancy for people to make that long-term commitment. And, that was another reason that played into our decision-making on securing the construction loans, right? There's nothing to take away that concern. Are you really going to build this when we commit to over $220 million worth of loans and have that capital secured to go ahead and execute construction? It does come up. We are holding firm on our deposit requirements. So it is a point of negotiation with the prospective buyers. Some are asking for a little bit more extended time, so they can play with their portfolio, or again, they can be opportunistic on when they translate whatever their equities or holdings are into cash. But in general, we are still getting the 30% deposit and getting it on our requested structure.
Good. Dave, you see that as well across your projects?
Yeah, I mean, I think you got two different phases. There's a reservation phase, so there are developments in that phase, which is kind of a token deposit, which is fairly easy to jump into. And then the contract stage, as Brian alluded to, all developments across the board are traditionally requiring something around a 30% deposit. And the only point of contention is, when is deposit 2 and 3 based on the staging of what the development is. If the development's further along, the deposits are probably more closely aligned. If the construction is just starting, potentially the more deposits are collected up front. But it is all, it is a requirement. The sales team educates and informs the buyer of that, and then it's up to the developer to find a way that makes best sense for them to make this work. But I think everyone's receptive to what's going on in the world and just trying to make it work for all parties, knowing that the bank institutes are the ones really in the driver's seat of what they need from a commitment side.
Sure. Sherry or Brooke, can you guys post the results of the poll? Okay, interesting. So we got 65% answering false, 35% answering true. And the question, remember, was the negative impact on Tampa condominium sales. So thank you. You can take that down. Question, and this can be, for anybody, anecdotally, and, my anecdote is I own a residential title company, and we have had 4 of the best months we've ever had, with no sort of, condominium or planned development sales taking place during that time. So really fascinating market that we have homes, condos, and single family really showing no signs of any impact on COVID. Meanwhile, we have historically high unemployment rates. There's a disjointed element there. So do you guys know or do you guys have any sense of why that's happening? Do you see any swing in the future in the condo market? Dave, this may be best answered by you because you see the single family. Is the single family holding up the same way that the condo market is?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the Tampa market is mainly suburban, so single family homes have always been Tampa's bread and butter to the industry, and condos are a little bit newer as far as the urban, but obviously all along the waterfront. It is driven by local sales. These are people who are looking, maybe this situation has advanced their thought process of what the next steps are. Life is short, make some moves, make the right moves. And also, I think there's a shortage of inventory. Real estate is always about supply and demand, and you're talking to 2 developers that really represent almost the entire market. So there is not a lot of new construction condominium opportunities, and I think buyers realize that, or if they take the time, which that's something that people have gotten back over the last few months, is they've gotten a time to reevaluate what's important to them. They got a chance to look online at several different, real estate opportunities and, decide on what they want to do. I think from our sake, we haven't seen that slow down because there is such a small supply of inventory in the South Tampa market, in the downtown Tampa market. We can say St. Petersburg the same, and Bayshore now has a few new options. But if you look over a 10-year period, these are the only new construction developments on Bayshore in that 10-year period, although it's condensed now into a more timeline. But I think that speaks to the risk that was taken by Virage and, what's happened thereafter.
Brian Taub, when you're talking to your prospective buyers and you only have, I think, one left or maybe none?
One left. So this is a cheap pitch. Anybody on here would like to buy the last one? Here's your chance.
Are you communicating with the prospects for that last unit? Is it all virtual? Are people coming in to tour the existing floor plans? What does a sales pitch or a developer pitch look like in this COVID world?
First of all, priorities. Lightning scored. Tyler Johnson 1-0. Okay. Now, to answer your question, we are still conducting site visits. We're still having showings and presentations. Hats off to Smith & Associates. They're doing a fabulous job. And they are in constant contact with prospects. And they have been through this whole ordeal. And typically the presentation is done by them at their office. And if they feel they want to go further, they come and we will take them on a private tour after business hours so that there's not work being conducted while they're visiting. And there's been a lot of activity. It's incredible. We could have sold the entire building with the number of visitors we've had in the past 6 weeks. We've had a lot of interest, just no one as of yet has pulled the trigger.
Brian, Vince, are you seeing the same thing in terms of that volume? And if you could talk a little bit about how you guys are interacting with prospects, that would be great.
Sure. As David mentioned earlier, obviously we had a complete almost shutdown for 60 days, right? Nobody wanted to come in to the sales gallery. Nobody wanted to even talk about real estate. As things stabilized, everybody's kind of confidence got back, or at least we're going to be okay. We were going to, there was light at the end. It may be, the tunnel may still be long, but we're going to get there. We're doing much more virtual, a lot of digital. So our digital hits, our website hits are way up. And like David said, we're not getting a ton of traffic, but the traffic we're getting is highly qualified, right? Because if you're going to make the decision to make an appointment, to come downtown, you know, come into a sales center, put a mask on, go through that routine that we've all kind of become accustomed to, you're not going to do it just to kind of kick the tires. So we have very highly qualified traffic. We are getting a lot of locals. Both of our projects have a significant local buyer pool anyway. But we are getting a lot of locals, and the people are staying here longer, right? So they're around, they're more engaged in real estate, and they're ready to make a decision, you know, and they're serious, they're focused. So we've had less traffic, but our conversion rates are still pretty good. We've done several contracts this week, you know, when in August you might pro forma a sale or two for the whole month. And again, that just kind of goes to a little bit of pent up demand, but also that people are here, they're not traveling as much, and there's a focus. There's also a migration from the East Coast. We're getting more buyers from the East Coast to Florida because they still want the urban lifestyle, but we're not nearly as dense as the East Coast is, right? So there probably is a little bit of a COVID impact there about density, but people have not completely abandoned the urban kind of lifestyle.
Yeah. I'm going to put the panelists on the spot with a question that I did not preview for you guys, but something each of you has mentioned has really made me think about it. So you guys are obviously out of the ground selling projects right now, but as developers, you're also thinking about what your next project looks like. What does the design, or how would you change the design of the building that's going to be the first building designed post-COVID? What are you going to do with the amenity spaces? What are you going to do with the interior spaces? How does that look that's different than today?
Well, I would jump in on, you know, a couple of things that are obviously unique, right, about a vertical building is elevators, right, in your common space. So there's the technology, the elevator manufacturers are all scrambling, right? They have products that are primarily office building products with destination control and efficiency, but you don't need that in a condo. But those are very expensive products. So they're all scrambling to kind of generate a user interface where you can either voice control or an app on your phone to go to your floor. You know, you can't obviously get rid of the vertical transportation element, but if people can get away from touching buttons, a lot of our projects already have automated doors. You know, we're looking at common areas where maybe it makes sense where we would have traditionally have had a push door. We put in an automatic door with a sensor. And, you know, one of the other things that we're looking at is air quality, common space air quality, right? Because the unit air quality and the common area air handlers don't mix, right? But if in some of the common spaces you can get some of the cleaning and you know, antibacterial elements and put those in there, those are kind of things we've been looking at, people have been asking for. But again, in general, people have not shied away from, you know, the common cohabitation of a condo building.
Our scenario is somewhat different. Obviously, the building's unique in that it's one residence per floor. So we have fobs that control the elevators and only get off on your floor, which opens up into your home. And being that there's only 15 residents, there's not as much of a sharing of common area space, and there's less people to share. Obviously, being boutique in nature, I won't say we're COVID proof or concerned because a vertical building's a vertical building, but I think there's less opportunity in which to interface with people and to have those typical multifamily large building concerns. And that is certainly no knock on Coulter. They do a fabulous job, build a quality project, and are very successful. Because of what we do and the way we do it, ours inherently is just more in a single family type environment. It's just vertical.
Yeah. On our end, you know, we make decisions based on buyer feedback or prospect feedback. And to be really honest, we don't have that feedback. You know, people aren't really asking what, you know, you would think, you know, when we have meetings with developers and clients, they're kind of asking, you know, do people ask questions about COVID and how would this building be better? That's usually not a dialogue that happens throughout the conversation. However, I think Brian Taub has mentioned there are some unique features within the home, and what Brian Van Slyke's reference is, I think the elevators, a touchless experience, a private experience are the two things that would be focused on, and obviously outdoor type spaces that are private and personal to you are those ones. And many of the condos already have those features already built in here in our Tampa Bay market because we're focusing on a really luxury buyer. And in other markets, that doesn't happen. And I keep going back to New York City, where you're in a condominium that may not have a balcony, and you're in an old building that is pre-war, that has shared everything. And, you know, our buildings here in our market are nothing like that. So we don't have to come up against as much conflict as you might assume.
Do you guys believe that right now would be the right time to start another project? And start the planning, not come out of the ground, but start the planning. Do you think that there's demand in Tampa, either downtown or on Bayshore, for another, you know, call it 100 units of condos?
I'd like to interject, lightening up to nothing. Because we are more of a mom and pop business, we aren't in that scenario in Tampa. Between what Coulter's doing, what Related is proposing to do, and Vinick and all the stuff, Marina Point, et cetera, there's just a lot going on. And while I think there is a market and there are Northerners moving down, especially as a result of COVID, for our type of business and what we do, I would not be interested in entertaining something right now in South Tampa of another condo.
I would say for the right location, you know, we're always active in the marketplace. We're always looking. Again, we're long-term, you know, this is our core market on the West Coast, you know, Tampa, St. Pete, Sarasota. And we actually just launched, it's not Tampa, but we just launched a project in Sarasota called Beso. And we are actually taking reservations. Again, atypical timing, atypical launch, but in August, we've already gotten 15 or so reservations on a luxury tower adjacent to our Ritz project in Sarasota. So yes, we remain active in the marketplace. Obviously, we're going to be very selective. It's got to be the right location, where maybe in a hotter market, you might take a kind of secondary location. We would only focus on the primary A+ locations. But we still think there's demand, and obviously these projects take 1 year to 2 years through the development, acquisition, planning phase to get underway. So it's a long horizon. So we would still entertain an acquisition in this current current market conditions.
Really timely question from one of our attendees, because I want to talk about construction costs in a second. And so this is the perfect bridge. Do any of you see condo conversions? It feels like everybody's been talking about them for a decade now without any of them really happening. Do you see condo conversions on the horizon instead of ground up construction of a tower or towers?
Well, I can say that we're currently working on the sales of the place at Channelside. It's a 10-year-old condominium that was bought in distress that turned into an apartment building, and we're whittling away the inventory, which is rental and clearing out some inventory for sales on a monthly basis, and that's performed very well. Obviously, those apartments are built with a smaller square footage. And we have strong financing options once these buildings are at a certain threshold. The challenges for a newer apartment building is the financing for the buyer. You know, these buyers aren't the people who have 30% deposits. They're not people who can wait 8 months for a closing. These are, you know, turn and burn type units where someone needs to close in a 30 to 45, 60-day period. And what does that financing look like available to them on the secondary or end market without a Fannie Mae or an FHA or, you know, that type of approval process, and what end users are comfortable doing it. Typically, it takes, you have to sell 30% of the building. Well, these apartment buildings are 300 units, so it's a game of numbers. So the confidence of it is challenged, but is there a market for it? Yes. A buyer, if you had a buyer being able to buy a newer apartment building with a quality of a condo 10 years ago, they would want it. It's just the reality. They want to put 5% down or 1% down and hold on it and do an inspection and close on it. And I think that's where the challenges are. And then the acquisition of the apartment is almost to a condo level. You know, these sales on Harbor Island for these apartments in downtown are very high, and the ability to resell them at that value is no longer in play. So there are challenges. We currently do stuff. I think the 10-year, like these buildings that maybe been held for a longer period of time are more likely to be a good situation. But there is a market for it, to answer it. I think it's the challenges are out there.
Okay. Brian, Todd, Van Slyke, are you guys at all entertaining conversions at this point?
That's not something that's in my comfort level. So for me, the answer is no.
Yeah, it's not our typical market. The 558 statute is so onerous.
Put it mildly.
And it's not really our core competency. We'd rather at least live with what we did instead of living with what somebody else did. So
yeah, no, that's yeah, it really is hard to price in that liability risk because you
right.
by definition have asymmetric information, and the risk is hard to quantify even if you do have perfect information. So question for Brian and Brian, you know, I'm hopeful that one of the side effects of COVID is going to be that contractors come back to earth with their pricing. Have you guys seen any sort of return to normalcy from contractors in pricing, or are we continuing to see the escalation that we saw for the last 3 or 4 years?
We obviously have just gone through buyout on, you know, the 35-story Saltaire and the 22-story High Park house in Tampa. So pretty significant buy, and we were able to use the leverage of buying 2 towers at once, kind of a little volume buy. What we were seeing late fall, early winter, pre-COVID, was we were seeing significant inflation. So we obviously have a pretty good historical database of what construction costs should be. When we pro-formed our projects, we put the appropriate level of inflation. And when we got our bids back, it was like 2 to 3 times what we thought it should have been in terms of inflation. And so it was a significant challenge. Yes, buying 2 projects at once. Yes, COVID. Some guys having, especially in the hospitality sector, having their backlog evaporate. We did get some relief. The caveat is we just got back to our pro forma number, or actually even still a little bit when the insurance market's going insane. Any relief we got was gobbled up by ridiculous insurance premiums, to the tunes of millions of dollars for insurance premiums. So yes, in general, there was some relief, but it wasn't what we would all hope and expect. We didn't go back in time a couple of years. We just kind of clawed everybody back to kind of where they should be. A lot of it was coming not just from the subs, but the whole supply chain. So, 2-3 layers down, everybody put an extra 10% on, and then the next layer put another 10% on. Before you know it, you've got an extra 30-40% in your bid. And there was nothing in the market that justified the cost impact other than just supply and demand. There wasn't a pipe shortage, a rebar shortage, and even with the factory shutting down, the overall global demand receded. So we haven't yet, knock wood, haven't run into any significant material shortages. We had to alternate source some products that on our REIC project that were coming out of Italy, but we were able to do it with American factories that now had excess capacity because they had lost their backlog. But so in general, we did see a little relief, but it was more of a flattening than a receding of the curve.
We don't have the volume or the buyer demand that Coulter obviously has, but we have not seen any relief whatsoever on prices. And I think it's exactly what Brian Van Slyke said. It's the amount of construction activity is causing that demand to continue to go up. If you just look in St. Pete and Tampa alone, you see how many cranes are out there and how much construction is going on. With that activity, I don't see pricing going down. It may take longer to source materials. Places in Europe that have been hit on sending things out, factories being shut down. So it could take longer, but I don't think prices have gone down, at least not substantially.
Right.
I've got one more question for each of you guys, and then I'm going to turn it over to Greg Williams to conclude the program. Before we get this question, I just want to say thank you to each of you taking the time to join us today. We all appreciate it. I appreciate it. And we wish you guys smooth deliveries and rapid sales. So,
all right.
Thank you.
So final question came from the audience, and I'm going to paraphrase and sum up, but as we hurtle toward November and whatever that brings in our national elections, are you worried about the disruption that election could bring to the lives or financial lives of your customers? Are you worried about interest rates? Are you worried about stock market movements, or is that something that's so esoteric and out there that you can't worry about it? So whoever, Brian Todd, why don't you go first?
Tampa 2-1. As far as our specific project is related, just the sanctuary. I'm not concerned because the end is near, and we have 30% deposit and extras that have been paid for in cash, and it relates to a lot of money that the buyer would be walking away from. So I believe, and our buyers mostly have second and third homes, so I believe that we're okay. At least I hope so, with closings in November and December. But again, we have a very, very small project and a very small niche.
Yeah, I would say, November is always circled on the calendar. Every 4 years, it has an impact. But, I think like we've always seen, there's always a lot of fear and uncertainty, and everybody's focus is on the election. But once you get past it, regardless of what your politics are, it typically calms down and people get back to their normal livelihoods. If there was a stock market, there's if, yeah, like you said, it is so esoteric. There's so many factors. You know, it's raining today, right? One thing I learned early in construction, I can't control the weather. You know, I can't necessarily control presidential politics. So we kind of try and react to it and make prudent decisions in light of it, but it's kind of out of our control. So.
Dave, you concur?
November? Yeah, we don't even think about it, right? So, you know, we only react to buyers' reactions. So we don't have any buyers coming in saying, oh, the election, you know, and if they do, that's when we try to come up with what is your concerns and try to give those realistic objections or try to understand what the concerns are. So we try to listen. That hasn't been an objection yet, not saying it can't be. But we work in anything that's uncertain is a problem for real estate. So just like our COVID situation, which we're still in, but those first few weeks, that was a freeze. And that might be a similar situation in November for a bit. But once the dust settles, that's what we are in, and people are willing to move forward. And usually the people who make these excuses probably would never buy anyway, because they're not going to give you 30% because they're afraid the building's going to fall down. So we can't really worry about all of that. I think the reality to it is we'll find a way to overcome it. And similar to Brian Van Slyke's comments is we can't concern ourselves with what we can't control. All we can do is provide real answers and help people through the process of buying a home.
Oh, that's great. Well, I'm going to turn it over to Greg Williams to wrap up the presentation. Thank you guys again. Really appreciate it. Greg, floor is all yours.
Yeah, no, Will, thank you so much. And David, Brian, and Brian, the really outstanding, the projects you guys are working on are exciting and really changing the skyline of the Tampa Bay area. So thank you very much for your time. It really was excellent. So I'm the current president of REIC. Sherry just asked me to kind of give everybody an update. We are going to have some programs in September. September 3rd in particular, REIC along with 7 other real estate professional organizations with ULI really taking the lead are co-sponsoring a program on race and real estate and creating a shared vision for equitable places in Tampa Bay. So that's free to both members and non-members. So hopefully if everybody's available on September 3rd at 8:30 in the morning, we really think that'll be a great program. And then additionally, in late September, we're going to have an Oktoberfest virtual beer and cheese tasting presented by the Brew Bus. So that'll be members only, and I think that should be a fun way to hopefully get everybody together and do something again via a virtual setup. So in addition to that, we've got additional programming planned for October and November, all virtual, and you know, taking into account COVID and social distancing. So again, thank you to Will and the panelists. And if there's no other questions, we can wrap it up. We know the Lightning game is going on, so go Lightning.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.